Yeah. I'm on the expensive mic today. I might sound a little different. Hey, I wrote this shit for Ronnie. Just know I'm here for you, brother. Reminiscing on them days when I shed a tear for you, brother. Know the toughest days you've been through are in the rear for you, brother. God moves on his own time, and he made it clear to you, brother. See the finish line. I visualize realities I wanted, then invented mine. It ain't how you start, it's how you finish. Word to the scrimmage line. Luckily, my hustle is my passion. This shit intertwined.
All right. Welcome back. Episode 22, I think it is, of the Coach's Corner podcast. And as always, got my right-hand man here, Mike Anderson. And today, we have a special guest, Sandee. I'm sorry, but I didn't ask for the pronunciation of your last name, and I really want to butcher that. How do you pronounce that?
It's Sgarlata.
Oh, wow. That seems a lot easier. Sgarlata. Perfect. Sgarlata. Cool. So Sandee is first and foremost, she is America's happiness coach. And I love that title because America needs a little bit more happiness right now. So I love that specifically. But also the author of Happiness Solved. She's the host of her own podcast, Happiness Solved Podcast, and an award-winning author of young adult fiction. So quite the list there. I like it. But cool. Let's go ahead and dive on into it. First and foremost, I'd like to get a little bit of background of where you're from, where you're located at, and start from there.
Yeah, so I am from Baltimore, Annapolis, Maryland. Right now, I'm in Northern Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C., where I've been for over 30 years.
Gotcha. Cool.
Specifically, Leesburg, Virginia. So
that's cool. I didn't realize that. We all kind of have some connections in the Virginia area. My girlfriend is from Kent Island, Maryland, actually.
Oh, nice.
So up close by you. But yeah. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and Mike's family is also from the Richmond area or has some family down there. So that's cool. I didn't realize we had that connection already from the rip.
And you say Northern Virginia because we don't want to be associated with Richmond.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
No, it's just because there's a political divide, I think, is what it is. So it's always like Northern Virginia.
Yeah. And it's funny because you're not even really, all the way up there in the real Nova area, but it's funny. But cool. Let's dive into one of my favorite things to uncover here is ultimately like how you got into what you're doing, so let's run it back, kind of like younger age and the transition into where you are now.
Okay, so my most recent book is Happiness Solved, Climbing 100 Steps. So the Happiness Solved is self-improvement. Climbing 100 Steps is a mini memoir. So the Climbing 100 Steps is kind of a metaphor because when I was 12 years old, we lived outside of Annapolis, Maryland in Severna Park, and we lived on the water. And there was 100 steps that went from the river dock all the way up to the house. And when I was 12 years old, at the time I was a competitive figure skater, it was like the happiest moments of my life. It was when I was climbing those 100 steps. And one afternoon I was called home early. I had been staying with a friend. My parents were out of town and they brought me home by boat because it was quicker. So me and my girlfriend were climbing the 100 steps. And it was kind of like every time I climbed those steps, I could hear the Rocky anthem, da, 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 and you're climbing those steps. And it was my happy place. So I get to the top of the steps. My father greeted me only to tell me that my older brother tragically died while serving in the U.S. Army. And he was in Germany. He was 19 years old. So my whole world just came crumbling down at that point. My mom went into a deep depression, rightly so. It was only until like the first 10 minutes I was holding my son when he was born that I kind of had a tiny, tiny, tiny little glimpse of what that must have been like for her. Right? Because it's a parent's worst nightmare is to lose a child. So I was kind of left on my own from that point on. And things were pretty good for a little while. I managed to keep doing my thing. I graduated from high school. I had made it into the Ice Capades because I was a competitive skater. I'd never even considered college and I was only going to go in the Ice Capades. And that was all I wanted to do. So I auditioned. I made it into the Ice Capades. 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, I got a letter in the mail saying, congratulations, you're put on a waiting list. So then I thought, what am I going to do now? All my girlfriends are going to college, and I never even considered college up to that point. So I went to a fashion institute that I found in the back of a magazine. I did that for one semester, absolutely did not like it at all, came back home and just started working. And I ended up moving to Washington, D.C., where I became a legal secretary and was doing really well. And there was one afternoon after work, we were at happy hour, and somebody pulled out some cocaine. And I was like, I had always refused it. It had been put in front of me multiple times. And my brother, part of the reason why he died was he had a lot of drugs in his system, and he was either pushed or fell out of a window. We will never know. It was 1979. The U.S. Army did not do an investigation. They said he fell out of the window. So, but he had a lot of drugs in his system. So I was very anti-drug. I had a weak moment, started using the cocaine that night, continued using it for about 4 years, and hit rock bottom, and ended up going to outpatient rehab program. I didn't want to do an inpatient program. I had just gotten engaged to my now ex-husband. At the time had just gotten engaged. So that was the turning point for me. And everything I talk about in the book is how I have lived my life the last 30 years after I, got back on the path of, recovery and more importantly, recovery from post-traumatic stress disorder, because I learned that I did have that as a result of going through something so tragic with my older brother. And so that's kind of the gist of my story. And I've just been on this quest ever since to always get back to a place where I was when I was 12, where I was climbing those 100 steps and just feeling so happy. So.
Such a powerful story. Like, I think, life is all about, I always say, like, blessings and lessons, right?
Yeah.
Like we have one or the other, and phases of our life, seasons of our life are what allow us to get one or the other, right? Mm-hmm. It's either the blessing or it's the lesson. And what would you say was, through that entire experience, and I'm sorry to hear about your brother's loss or your loss of your brother as well, but I myself lost two of my best friends when I was 19 years old in a car crash, and that was my turning point as well. Was that? So I definitely resonate with your story as a whole. What would you say was like your key to get you through that time period, and what brought you out of that dark phase that you went through?
So it was a culmination of many things. And I have to be honest, at first, when I realized that I had hit rock bottom abusing cocaine, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to stop using it. I loved it. It was amazing. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Like, I was having the time of my life. I did not want to. On the flip side of that, though, fast forward probably 5 years and you look back and you think about it, how many early mornings I'd be laying in bed with my heart just pounding away and just hoping and praying that I wouldn't wake up the next morning, because I didn't want to struggle through another day. But when you're in the midst, in the throes of an addiction, you don't see that. So at first I was doing it because I quit using drugs, and I had to quit using alcohol and, everything when you're going through that. I was doing it for my fiance, because I didn't love myself enough to do it for myself. So I did it for him. Now, fast forward, 10 years into therapy, I was going to a therapist once a week, had a lot of baggage to clean up from, not just my brother's death, but prior to that, there was a lot of stuff that had happened as a child that I didn't realize was making it even harder for me to love myself. Mm-hmm. So it was just a culmination of things. And I think the biggest turning point for me was learning how to trust, because I didn't trust that things were going to work out exactly as they're supposed to. I had no trust there. And I kept being told that to help you learn to trust, you have to notice that there's all sorts of miracles being put in front of us and being presented in front of us every single day. And I didn't know what that looked like. So a few weeks had gone by and I was just praying. My higher power is God. You can call it whatever you want, the universe, whatever. I I call it God. So I was praying to God, what is it? Please show me a miracle because I don't understand what that means. So there was one day I had recently quit smoking cigarettes and I was dying for a cigarette. And I'm sitting I pulled up to a red light and I look to my left and there's this beautiful woman in a convertible, top down, sun's, shining off of her blonde hair, just beautiful. Everything about it was beautiful. And I look to my right and there's this old woman in this beat up car and she has a cigarette in her hand and she, takes a hit of the cigarette, her hand's shaking, right? She's all wrinkled and this and that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, but I had that comparison there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All of a sudden, as if on cue, the Tom Petty song came on the radio. Well, I won't back down. No, I won't back down. Or you can stand me up at the gates of hell. I won't back down. I'm going to stand my ground, blah, 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 blah. And I just started to cry. And then I just started laughing because I was like, that's hysterical, like that was a miracle right there. I was shown the polar opposites. If I keep smoking, I'm going to look like that old lady. And I'm going to be sitting there with emphysema shaking, right? And that was just my cue to be, hey, I have to trust. Like, you got this. You can do this. Just trust. Everything's going to work out. And from that point on, miracles do take place all around us. Sometimes we're just, have tunnel vision and we don't really see it. But if you open yourselves up to see, there are no coincidences. Everything happens for a reason, in my opinion.
So yeah, no, I think that's really powerful right there. And like the biggest thing that I take away from that, well, there's a couple of things, but number one, the belief, like having the belief is to me like one of the biggest things when it comes to really getting anything you want in life. Like you have to like 100% believe and desire that you can achieve that thing, and like that goes back to like Think and Grow Rich, the shit's been around like for years, like hundreds of years or however long. But the biggest thing is that I see most people do is right there. They don't even believe that they can get that one thing that they want, or they don't even believe that they can, accomplish a goal or lose the weight, do whatever it is. And like, it's just like, man, you're doomed from the get-go. So it's cool to hear that you took that out of that. One thing that I think about too with this is the whole concept of like positive focus, like finding like the positive in every situation, like finding the positive out of every situation. I think that's really important too. And that goes into anything, like a lost sales call, like, a bad breakup, a death, like there's lots of things that we could find that positive in. And I feel like most people just choose not to, they're too tied up in kind of like what you were talking about, like, how can I cloud this out of my life? Cocaine, just drugs, other different things. And that's ultimately, a lot of us like result to those things rather than just like sucking it up and figuring out like what we need to do as a human to like move through, to keep pursuing. So I think there's a lot of power in both stories, that story and this one. But yeah, no, I think overall, the biggest thing is like, I mean, obviously we do a lot of this with like coaches specifically, and the common denominator is always this, it's always like some sort of hardship coming through. And I think that's like ultimately like why I really enjoy having these conversations and the podcast around it. That type of stuff is because I feel like the people out there in the world, like even me for a long time, I felt like this, like, why me? Like I was expelled from college, I got arrested a couple of times, and those were kind of all my breaking points. And oftentimes I kept feeling like, why me? Why does this keep happening to me? And it wasn't until like the last time that I got arrested that I was like, this is it. Like, I'm fucking done. And it was a similar, like, kind of like vision that you had, where it was like the polar opposites. Like, I knew like the friend group that was like running these routes, and like I knew what this would transpire to be. And it was one of those moments where it was like, I will do anything and everything to not continue this path, so right. I think that's almost like what you experienced right there as well, is kind of like the polar opposites, like your first connection, like I got two decisions, I can keep running this track record, or I can change my freaking life and get my head back on my shoulders the right way. And that's ultimately like we have these conversations, and it's like the same thing, but and I always bring this thing up every single podcast, but I have a question above my head, and it says, what do you want? You can't see it, but it's on the whiteboard just above. And it's that constant reminder, like, what do you want, And so I want to ask you, is that something that like ultimately like came about for you? Is that, did you finally figure out like, hey, this isn't what I want, and there is something else that I do want,
Oh yeah. I mean, within the first probably 6 months of, when I stopped using drugs, I realized very quickly that I wanted a better life, that this was not it. It was when you hit rock bottom, anything above that is better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you just start to feel better, and you wake up in the morning, you don't feel drugged, for lack of a better word, you just feel better, and you want to keep that going, and it's unfortunate that so many people have to have these breaking points in their life. And I always tell people, don't wait till you have that breaking point. Now is the time to change. Don't wait until, don't let 20 years pass you by. I mean, I was so lucky that I was still in my early 20s when I stopped using drugs, and I still had, so many years left of my life. But not a lot of people do that. They waste so many years of their life.
Yeah, for sure.
Sad.
Yeah. And I think so much of it is due to, like the lack of awareness in a way, right? It's like, I think self-awareness is probably one of the most important things that you can exercise, especially in this day and age where there's so much going on around us at all times, so many distractions, and it's very easy for us to numb and distract whatever we're going through in life in order to forget about it. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Push it aside and just be like, oh yeah, like let me just scroll on social media. Let me just, hit this joint. Let me just, hit this line of Coke, like whatever it is. There's all different types of numbing and distracting out there. And the power of awareness is so important in this day and age because of that, right? There's so many things that we can lean on. And if we're not aware of the fact that it is a distraction and we are numbing something that we're going through, then it's going to reciprocate. It's going to continue happening. It's going to be repetitive. It's going to turn into that addiction, right?
For sure. If you keep doing it long enough, it's going to bite you in the ass, for sure.
Yeah. So based off of so tell me a little bit about the books, because I'm interested now. I like your story a lot. It's very captivating. So tell me a bit about your books. Which one is your favorite? Let's do that. Which one is your favorite, and get into kind of the details of it for me.
Okay, so they're both very different. So my first one was a novel for young adults. The second one is a self-improvement. I'd never written a self-improvement book. I'd never written a novel before. I didn't know I was a writer. It just kind of happened. And I realized, okay, this, I'm not too bad at it. But I have to say the novels I love the most, because I had a contract to write 5 books, and it was supposed to be a series. First one was released in 2009, and I was the finalist in 2 book awards, which was mind-blowing that I even, kind of got second place, right? Like that was incredible. The second book was finished in 2010, and my publisher went out of business. So that second book has been sitting there for 12 years, and it's such a great story that needs to get out there. So my big goal for this year is to finish the third one, combine the 3 together, and put it out under a fresh title, new title, and it'll just be 3 books into one. And it's kind of like a self-help book for teens, but it's in the form of a story, because teenagers are not going to read a self-help book. Most of them are not going to. The majority are not going to. But it's a really good story about a typical teenage girl going through typical things that they go through. And she gets hit by a car while she's riding her bike. It ends up in a coma, and she's walking down this path in the coma. She's having these images where she's walking down this path, and she comes to the end of this path, and there's this big tree, and there's a little girl standing there, and the little girl, she realizes, is herself as a 5-year-old little girl, or maybe it was 6. And the little girl looks up at her and says, "How did we get this way?" And so the little girl starts to teach her about, forgiveness and trusting and acceptance, and that there's miracles. So everything that's in my self-improvement book is in that book. It's just in the form of a story. And it's a little girl that's telling her future self how to be. And she's teaching her skills and how to be, because I really feel like we all started out as these innocent little kids, and then the world just gets to us and starts telling you can't do that. You suck. That's wrong. All of these things. And then we just start the kids go through puberty, and they really don't know what the heck they're doing at that point. I mean, my son's only 21, so it's pretty recent to me, I only have one kid, and, just watching him go through adolescence and everything. And now he's a young man, and it's still, you're 21, you're a man, but you're not really a man yet. You think you are, but you're really not, as you guys know, right?
Of course.
And so, there's so many different things that they go through. So that's probably my favorite, because I feel like it's the most, in a sense, I feel like I released it ahead of its time, and the world wasn't really ready for it. The motto in that is forgive for peace. And it was forgive for peace. And what that means is if you're feeling anything but peace in your heart, there's someone or something that you need to forgive. Usually it's yourself. And so I feel like, and the book, both of my books are, I keep them, I don't talk about any religion in any way, shape, or form. It's all just very generic. And it's just, for me, because I'm very spiritual, not religious, everything I talk about is from a human perspective. This is just how we need to be as a human being. Like, forget everything else. I'm just talking about, let's be human. So.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, specifically the kind of, transfer that you did as far as like, the attack side of things is as far as getting the book to somebody's interest, because to that exact point, like, when I was that age, like I could give two shits about self-help books either. I thought I knew everything. I was self-help, like I'm the king of the world. What are you talking about? But to that point, I've actually been on kind of like the same journey where I'm like, and kind of same thing, like I don't view myself as an author, but I have like in the past year or so been like writing a book, and it's basically like, it's like I plan on titling it like a message to my little brother. And like my siblings are all, like my youngest one, or my oldest sibling, which is obviously younger than me, but he's like 13 right now. So I'm 26, wow. So we have like 13 years in between each other. And my youngest one, she's like 8. So, wow. Like they're real young, but the whole point of the book is all these different things that I've learned like in the past couple of years that I wish I knew then, So, a lot of it talks about just kind of like the pressure of society, college, stuff like that. And, just you finding you, like, what do you want? That question that always comes up. And obviously like practical shit like credit, taxes, shit like that, but it's all like kind of based on like my own fuck ups. So it's like my own story and like what I learned you should do type of thing. But I really like kind of your angle of it where it's like, an actual story that somebody would be like really intrigued and like just wanting to read, or even like a freaking Netflix documentary, like something like that to me could be like a Netflix, series of maybe just one episode or a movie, but something like that. And I think that would come across like so much more powerful, because that's one thing that I've really noticed, because not specifically with my siblings, but my younger cousins that are kind of in that in-between stage of like my oldest sibling and my age, they're very resistant to like any type of like, you should read the Daily Stoic book. It's just one little passage every morning you can read that'll just kind of get you thinking a different way. Yeah. They're like, fuck that, like I can just tell they have no intentions of it, And so I really like that angle, and just overall, like I can definitely see that being a huge hit as far as not only impact, but, just the attractiveness to the other side, to want to like invest in the story itself, learning the story and the output. So that's really interesting to hear that. I like that.
Thank you.
So I guess like one of my big things that kind of transpires off of that is like, what was the calling to start writing? Like, how did you get into that?
So it was the novel that I started writing. And so I used to be a figure skating coach. I'm actually a retired U.S. national and international figure skating coach.
Sheesh, we got a legend here. I didn't even realize it, Mike.
Thank you. I retired 20 years ago from coaching skating, and that's when I got certified to be a life coach. So I've been certified as a life coach since 2004, but started doing it a few years earlier. Because when you're coaching skating, you are a life coach as well. You're their mom, you're their dad, you're everything to them. So I had a student who, she was about 15 years old, and I could tell that she was making some choices that weren't in her best interest. So I just put it all out there. And I told her about how, I went down the wrong path. I ended up, abusing drugs, and, was just saying, the choices you make now are going to affect everything moving forward. So fast forward a few years later, she was probably 18 at the time. My son was 2, and she would babysit for me. And so we'd done this a few times. We were on a trip to the beach in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. And so she came with us. We were there for 2 weeks. So she came with us to babysit my son so that my husband and I could go out. And so there was one night she was sitting there and she played the guitar, and she goes, I have to tell you that I was starting to experiment with drinking and with drugs. And because you pulled me aside and shared that with me, you changed the course of my life. Mm. And I ended up not trying drugs. She goes, I'm still a virgin. I actually went to her wedding 7 years later, and she was still a virgin. Mm. Not that, different opinion about that. Really. Anyway. I feel totally different about that. But anyway, for her, it was important because of her religion. And I totally respected that. So that was really awesome because it was important to her.
I mean, what that shows to me is like she committed to herself,
She just committed to herself. And that's
exactly,
awesome. Yeah. It's totally awesome. Totally awesome. And it was a religious thing. And I totally respect that 100%. So what that did for me was like, wow. And that the next day I wrote the first page of the novel. Wow. And then I put it aside for like 4 years and then went back to it. Yeah. And it ended up finishing it. And, that's kind of how it started. And because it wasn't that I didn't have the confidence to be a writer. I just had no clue. And there was some of that. There was probably a lot of that imposter syndrome, which I never knew what that was until 2021. All of a sudden, everybody starts talking about imposter syndrome. I'm like, what the heck is imposter syndrome? So I'm sure there was a lot of that. It was like, who am I? I think I got maybe a C at best in English class in high school, but I read a lot. I'm a really big reader. And and being a legal secretary, I learned how to write. I learned the correct grammar and things like that. So I did, learn on my own. I'm a self-taught writer by all means. But you don't have to be an English lit major to write a good novel, So I had to get rid of a lot of those, Freddy the fuckers, that get in your mind and tell you that you can't do this or you can't do that. But yeah, I mean, it just kind of happened. And then lo and behold, I was a finalist in 2 book awards. And so that certainly strengthens that confidence muscle there. Yeah. And I'm just anxious to get the final version out. And yes, thank you for suggesting the Netflix documentary or whatever, because that's always been in the back of my mind. And real quick, so the first job I had after I went through a divorce, I had to stop coaching because I was a single mother like that. A whole nother story, another major tragedy in my life. So I went back to work as a recruiter because when I stopped coaching skating and I was building up my life coaching business, I started an IT recruiting company. And so I love recruiting because it's very similar to coaching because you're working with people and everything. So I get on the phone talking to this guy and he goes, the Rummage Group. He goes, my daughter, Taylor Swift, that's a name you can market. And I'm like, oh, ha, ha, ha. I look at it, it says Scott Swift. I'm like, yeah, yeah. So we're talking business. And before we get off, I said, oh my gosh, I'm a huge fan. I just took my son to see her Speak Now tour. This is in 2011. And I'm like, I'm a huge fan. He's like, oh my gosh. Well, I really was talking to Taylor Swift's father. And he just went on and on and on and on. And I said, my fantasy is that this book will become a movie, and I want her song 15 to be the theme song. And then he starts saying, Taylor wrote a book when she was 11. It's called A Girl Named Girl. And he starts reading this page from her book. And then he starts to cry. And I'm like looking at my coworker. I'm like, I'm talking to Taylor Swift's dad, and he's crying right now. I'm like, oh my God. It was like one of those moments. So yeah. But that's just been in the back of my head for years and years. And if it's made into a movie, I want to use Taylor Swift's song. Stay tuned.
No, I think you got to come in, because I'm not sure if you've heard of like the recent like Fanatic show, but like Euphoria is what it's called, and it's very like high school raunchy. Like, I don't know, it's pretty wild. So just based on like that connection, like I think there's a lot of that type of stuff in it. Like it's like showing you like the bad side of shit, you know, what you shouldn't be doing, but you can watch it, so like that way you don't go do it, type of thing. but like that's what it made me think of, is like when you were telling that story. So it's cool to hear that. But but no, that's super funny about that conversation there. but one thing I pulled out of that too is you mentioned confidence, and I think that's honestly probably the biggest thing that is like the deal breaker with everybody out there, is like they're not confident in themselves and really anything, the ability to do anything. Because I feel the exact same thing about like the whole books thing. But you know, it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not a writer, you know, like I do marketing shit, and you know, like you know, like I'm in business, you know, I was terrible in school, type of thing. And but it's one of those things where like I've constantly thought, you know, like if I just like put my mind to it, if I just commit to it, you know, like I'll get it done, and it'll be something. But it brought up like a different type of thought. And I was listening to a podcast. I shared it with Mike too, so he knows what I'm talking about. But it was a podcast with Jay Shetty as like, you know, the guest. And he was talking about like the topic was like monk enough, you know. And he was talking about when he was writing his book, in like a day before he released it, he sent an email to, or the day before it was like released to the public, he sent an email to the publishers and basically like thanked them for like what they accomplished, you know. And like the guy like immediately responded back, was like, dude, we haven't even launched yet, you know, like what are you talking about? And he was like, no, like what I've created here is like a masterpiece, you know, like I gave it my all. Like if one person likes it, that's cool with me. So I've been like constantly thinking about that, like when it comes to creating content and the book thing, like all that type of stuff. So I want to know, is that like something you ever like thought about? Like maybe I'll release this thing and nothing ever happens with it.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the thing is that, you know, realistically, and I know this because I know a lot of authors and I've talked to a lot of people, you know, 99% of the people that put books out there, you only sell a certain amount. You know, you don't, you know, you've got to get really lucky, for lack of a better word. I don't even know what the secret sauce is in order to be a Jay Shetty or a Mel Robbins. It's not that, it's not, you know, doesn't work like that for 99% of the authors. Doesn't mean that you can't do that. I'm just saying, you know, so I let go of any expectations when I released the book, because we were in the middle of COVID, right? I finished the book in January of 2020. It didn't get published till February of 2021. And I just released all expectations. I wasn't going to be able to do any book signings. You know, it was just, I didn't even know how to do a virtual book release. I was clueless. What do I do? You know, I only have experience going to bookstores and setting up a table and, you know, I mean, I've been on dozens of podcasts. I've done 4 live television interviews where they featured my book, and one of them was a national placement, which was great. Has it equated to sales? I have no idea.
Yeah.
So you just have to let go of any expectations. And I just really believe, and I'm the same thing, just like Jay Shetty said, if I can change one person's life, that's what's all that matters to me. And I let go of all of those expectations because I can't control people's purchasing decisions. And I have gotten enough feedback and reviews from people that it's really, my book has really changed their life. And that's all that matters to me. And the right people will read it when it's right for them. And I even say it in there, you're reading this right now for a reason. There's no coincidences. And so I feel like whenever somebody picks up that book and they read it, it's the right time for that person.
I love it. I love it.
That's another lesson in itself, right? Is like detachment from expectation.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
In everything in life, you know, everything. It's like, because we all have expectations of what we want, right? And like how we want it to play out. And reality is if we lean on those expectations too much, then that's really what puts us in negative state if it doesn't happen, right? It's like, so those expectations that we set on a day-to-day basis can affect us a lot, right? So like, that's a huge lesson, is just letting go, surrendering. Like, all you can control is your day-to-day actions, and the rest of it is going to play out the way it plays out, you know?
Yeah.
As long as you have that belief and desire.
Well, of course, but when you're placing expectations onto something or someone, all you're doing is setting yourself up to be disappointed. Now, did I have aspirations of becoming, you know, a New York Times bestselling author? Absolutely. Is that realistic? You know, you just have to let it go. Of course, you know, I can, you know, practice the law of attraction and this and that, you know, till I'm blue in the face. But at some point, there's a difference between being realistic, because I am more of a realist, you know. You just have to be realistic, and let go of those expectations, because it's, you know, there's only so much we can control.
Exactly. You can only control what you can control, right? So it's like it's not to say like don't have goals and don't have aspirations and all those other things, right? But it's like, don't also beat your head against the wall because they weren't necessarily hit at the timeline that you made the expectation of, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right.
100%. Well, awesome. I mean, this has been a super powerful conversation. I know we mentioned that we would wrap up at like 15 minutes prior because you had an upcoming podcast. So what I do want to do is I want to give you the opportunity to shout out to our audience anywhere that they can connect with you, because I'm sure a lot of people will be resonating with your story, and I'm sure a lot of people will want to get your book and all this stuff from our audience who's listening in. So please direct them in the best way possible of how they can connect with you.
Okay. So my website is sandeesgarlata.com. And on there, they can schedule a free consult with me. There's a link to purchase the book. There's a link to my podcast. Instagram is at Coach Sandee Sgarlata. Facebook, my professional page is at Coach Sandee Sgarlata. My personal page is Sandee Sgarlata Addison, which is the same on LinkedIn as well. And I have a YouTube channel, which is Happiness Solved. And my podcast is was actually ranked number 11 out of the top 80 happiness podcasts. And you can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's all over the place.
Awesome.
Love it.
Well, you heard it here. I don't know if you heard it here first, but you heard it here again. If not, so connect with Sandee. Amazing story. Really grateful to have you on, Sandee.
Thank you, Mike and Mike.
Have you back in the future, because I know there's probably a lot that we didn't get to for sure.
It's all good.
Thanks a bunch.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah. I'm on the expensive mic today. I might sound a little different. Hey. I wrote this shit for Ronnie, just know I'm here for you, brother. Reminiscing on them days when I shed a tear for you, brother. Know the toughest days you've been through are in the rear for you, brother. God moves on his own time, and he made it clear to you, brother. See the finish line. I visualize realities I wanted, then invented mine. It ain't how you start, it's how you finish. Word to the scrimmage line.